the betting pole.
Give me 1 second. Let's start the timer and then we'll come back.
Ah,
I am a watchman on the wall. This is my portion, and this is my watch. Contending to behold promises yet fulfilled, but your hand goes beyond what is seen by these eyes. I am a watchman, and I take my place as I wait. I will keep the faith, 'cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. I am a watchman on the wall, and my eyes are fixed on the horizon. Oh, I will run this race, and I will fight this fight for the sons and daughters who come behind. I am a watchman, and I take my place as I wait. I will keep the faith, 'cause I am a watchman, and I stand my ground. But if I never see it, I will stay the course. Cry for righteousness, and I stand for truth. I'm never giving up. I'm always hoping in you, and I keep my heart set upon your voice, knowing that your word, it never comes back void. No weapon will prosper, no enemy triumph. He will not overcome, he can't scale these walls. Injustice will not win, hell's gates will not prevail. Not on my time, not on my watch. I am a watchman, and I take my place
Well, welcome in everyone today on this October 21st, 14 days till the election, or 15 days and counting down. And today we want to cover basically the case set before us, as I titled it here. And what we want to do, we have Randy Grigsby here with me live in Shreveport, Louisiana, out in the boonies sticks. So hopefully his internet can stay on topic here. With us is he and Randy is our resident historian, political commentator, and author who has written several books. And I'll put the link to his Amazon store here, where he's written a story called "A Train to Palestine" and "A Labyrinth of Darkness." Um, his being a history buff, where he tells a story of on the train to Palestine of what it took for some refugees, in a sense, to paraphrase, uh, on making their trip through and world wars and war zones in order to get to Israel and make a peaceful landing there. And he tells a story around that. But today we want to dive into this election, and we want to have a conversation, and we're just gonna lay the facts out there as they may of literally the case set before us on what is the most historic presidential election we've had, not only in my lifetime, but I don't know, Randy, you could probably speak to even going back to yours and before, of where we have two candidates who one has been in office before, so we know their record, and then you have another candidate as a vice president now who has tied herself to the sitting president's record. And so we have evidence before us on what actually the records of each candidate is, rather than this hypothetical of, okay, the president's term limited. Now you have two new candidates who you don't know what they would do when they become president. You literally have a vice president who knows the day to day. You have a president who knows the exact day to day of what it takes to be president. And then we want to look at the record. We don't want to look at, who the person is, get into that, dispute there. Because in business and management and marketing, Randy could speak to this, is you would want to more so look at the idea and attack the idea that the person is representing, not the person themselves. Business management 101 there. And what we want to first start off with is looking at where the candidates stand on several key issues. We want to highlight where they stand on Israel, and obviously the issue of possible World War III. We want to look at where each candidate stands on pro-life. Thirdly, the economy and some of the economic stances and things that they're going to take or have taken and what they plan to do in the future. And then obviously one of the main things that's becoming more and more relevant is the border. And sometimes this stuff can get lost in the shuffle, but we want to kind of highlight those and dive deep. And the reason we were just talking about this before we went live is that, you have polls saying one thing, and obviously politics is a blood sport game, is what a lot of people like to call it. We like to call it here, where polls can say one thing, in 2016 and 2020, they were kind of off. And the question is, are the polls correct? And so, and that can be a sketchy game to play there, of really thinking about, well, is this poll correct? Is it not? And what we want to do is that even, we may hold different opinions, but at the end of the day is still go vote, still go, do your American duty as a citizen to go vote and let your voice be heard. And John West talks about our prophet in the house, where if you're going to sit here and complain and say this and that, but you're about politics and you're not going to go vote, you kind of need to be quiet a little bit, because if you're not going to do your responsibility in a sense as an American citizen to go out and vote, then this is the time right now to make your voice be heard, and not later after the fact and saying Monday morning quarterback, well, we should have done this, we should have done that with said and such a president. But now, moving forward, I want to dive right into it. And so we want to look at, I want to lay this out there, and we'll start here, is and because this is a key foundation for where both candidates stand, is President Trump has his record to run on. We'll get into that. Now, the record that Kamala Harris is running on is, one, she has to run on President Biden's now presidency, and she is doing that. And there are those within her campaign who think she should do that. So she is lauding his record, saying that in an interview right after, or in a speech right after Biden stepped down and nominated her, is that his record is unmatched. So she's not trying to differentiate herself. I think that's all very clear there. So when we talk about Harris and what her campaign and what her record is, she has tied it herself to the Biden presidency and the record, and she thinks it's a good thing. Now, with that, we want to dive into Israel. So last week we saw Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza, who led the October 7th massacre in southern Israel, get wrapped up in some bombs and be taken out. And it's been confirmed by both Israeli sources through dental records and fingerprinting that they had, because he was a prisoner within Israel's jail system for 23 plus years. And then last week, the IRGC, Hamas, Hezbollah, everybody's come out and confirmed along with Israel that, yes, this has taken place. From there, we've seen Hezbollah in the north and Iran kind of increase their attacks towards Israel in the north. And what we want to talk about here, starting off, is where does each candidate stand in regards to Israel? Obviously, we can wrap up the Ukraine war there, but then ultimately where they stand on the possibility of a World War III and what that means for the future of our nation. So I'll say this, and I'll let you talk, Randy, is this weekend we saw U.S. intelligence leaks out of the Biden administration, where Harris will basically pull those same people in. Let me pull this up here. Give me one sec. And we saw this leak coming out of the campaign, or more so the administration, that gave away Israel's plans on a possible attack towards Iran. Now, whether these are real plans or fake plans, this is just the best way I can describe it is unbecoming of an administration. I mean, you would leak internal plans. This not only hurts Israel itself, but this hurts future relationships with the Biden-Harris administration, which I wouldn't say is on even a strong soil, a hard soil. I think it's very shifting sand soil, which I think everybody can understand. And then you have the opposite effect, and then we'll discuss this, where you have President Trump coming in, and this is his statement when asked about what Israel should do in regards to Gaza, where he, and this is from NBC News, the title here is "They Should Finish the Problem." You also have, and I want to play this clip here, where President Trump at CPAC, and he said the same thing in a debate about what would happen involved with military action around the world.
I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly.
And so he said similar things towards Israel as well. There are military people who, even after the debate, when he said it on the debate stage, they truly believe that he will end it and prevent possible World War III, because he knows the players on the field. He knows how to get them to respond. But I want to throw this out there. Let's start the discussion here, Randy, about as someone who obviously we know where we stand politically in support of Trump and where he stands on this issue. But for somebody, and this is what we want to focus the conversation on, for somebody who might be on the fence, who might be saying, well, maybe Trump would do this, maybe Trump might do that, maybe Kamala Harris might do this. If you were to be sitting down in front of them, having a conversation with them, how would you bring this topic up, and how would you lay the facts out there before them on this case of Israel and possible World War III?
Let me if I could, let me just go back and build a little prologue. I was listening to your intro, and it made me think of something, that all politics is the same and all politics are different if you look at it through history. This is a very unique situation that we're in, Zach. The landscape's totally changed for two reasons. You may agree or disagree. I think President Trump became a major player in 2015 because there was a weariness that all of us as Republicans had. Wars. I mean, let's look at let's look at George Bush, who I campaigned for, who I worked for, who I believed in. He gave us a 19-year war. And that's been the case ever since World War II. I think there was a weariness among the American people that, why do we do this all of the time? Why do we always have wars where we young men go in and die, and we don't seem to really accomplish anything when that happens, such as in my generation, the Vietnam War. So I think you have to apply that factor. There was a weariness there that allowed President Trump to come into this window of opportunity. And that's what he came in and told us. That's what he was going to do. And he honored those by not starting a war, by getting our soldiers out of harm's way in many cases. But more importantly, he did this with the Israel factor. He shut Iran down. Iran was bankrupt. They had no money. They were in dire straits. They had sanctions against them. And when President Trump was in, Iran could not have started what they started with Israel now on October 7th. They wouldn't have had 200 ballistic missiles to shoot. They had no money. That all changed under Obama. And that's where I think we have to, if we look at Vice President Harris, we've got to go back behind Biden. We have to go all the way back to Obama, because that's really where she fits in, the Obama strategy. See, President Trump wasn't supposed to win in 2016. Hillary was, and it was going to be a continuation of this leftist march that our country is on right now. I mean, how different is America from 4 years ago? Do we recognize the America that was there? That started under President Obama with his leftist move. What advantage was it for President Obama to give Iran the capabilities of a nuclear weapon? What advantage was that to our country and to our allies such as Israel? President Trump shut that down totally. Matter of fact, when you just showed the little short segment on Israel, we could have ended our session and gone and had lunch, because as far as I'm concerned, that's it. What did President Trump do for Israel? He stopped Iran cold in their tracks. He took away billions of dollars. He put sanctions on them. He choked the host of terrorists is Iran. He choked them down to they had nothing. All the blood that is on Israel now lies back on previous administrations, starting with President Obama. I'm sorry, that's just fact. What else did he do? President Trump moved the embassy to Israel. It's been promised for 20 years, and he did that. That's a symbolic move, but it's a significant move. Now Jerusalem is recognized as the capital. And then we've got the present day administration that Harris has been a part of. She told an interviewer the other day on one of the major networks, is there anything you would change with the Biden administration? She said, no, I can't think of a thing. So now what she's telling us is they would treat Israel the same way they've been treating them for the since October the 7th. If you read, I read a lot about Israel and I write a lot about Israel, Zach. The ceasefire is always a weapon for the enemy of Israel since 1948. Every time Israel starts winning, a government that's not pro-Israel starts talking about ceasefires. Let's stop. Israel's winning, so now let's have a ceasefire. And that's what Harris is saying she's going to continue to do. There's nothing, there's not going to be anything new toward Israel on that. Trump also recognized that the Golan Heights was officially part of Israel, which was a big thing. They're naming streets and towns after him in northern Israel. Netanyahu's autobiography has 2 full chapters on what Trump did and how Trump worked with him to negate terrorist attacks on Israel. I think this is the biggest positive that you could possibly have. Now, the information that I put together this morning was that the 3 things are economy, immigration, and foreign policy. Foreign policy would include Israel. I think this is perhaps the thing that I'm the proudest that he's done as president, is what he did for Israel to take them out of harm's way, which they're now back into, thanks to beginning with the Obama era.
Yeah, and let's contrast that. I think that's great bringing in Obama. Let's contrast that. pulled this video up. This is last week before Yahya Sinwar was taken out. This is what Harris said herself.
We have been clear in multiple conversations and in every way that any major military operation in Rafah would be a huge mistake. Let me tell you something. I have studied the maps. There's nowhere for those.
And so the issue here is for the folks who were there, who by all accounts are a part of Hamas, who are still left there, saying we shouldn't go in because, they're there. And if Israel would have listened to that, they would not have taken out Sinwar.
Yes.
And by all accounts, the record of how they took him out, it was a semi-accident. I mean, they were bombing buildings because they knew Hamas fighters were in those buildings, but they didn't know he was in there. And they later found out that was possibly him, and then they ended up cutting off a finger to do a DNA test because they didn't want to remove the body. And then eventually through dental records, they showed somebody put an F on studying maps. I think that's very correct, Greg. Through dental records, they showed it was Sinwar. And so this is the contrast there. And then let's look at the North. They're telling them to not go after quote unquote civilian buildings and things. But the issue is, and this is coming out in Israel, the issue is that almost every building in southern Lebanon is a military asset, has 2-ton bombs basically under beds, just like in Gaza. And there's the possibility, and Israel is trying to find this out, is that Iran has been using the Beirut airport to sneak weapons, to sneak military leaders of Hezbollah into Lebanon. One of the heads of the IRGC is the one literally flying the actual plane to get leaders in and out of there. So now you have this administration saying, don't go after, Hezbollah assets because they might be civilian, but at the same time, they're military assets. And this is the cloak of what Hamas and Iran and Hezbollah does, is they use quote unquote civilian assets. And this goes back to the relations with the UN. And so here's where you see what Randy pointed out is the positives of what Trump has done. And look, we could probably find something Trump's done wrong. We're not sitting there saying he's perfect. But at the end of the day, it is what equals out. Is it a net positive or a net negative? And I think we have to ask the question of, okay, if you stand for Israel, and let me say this, there are a lot of Jews. I was actually talking to somebody yesterday in South Florida. There are a lot of Jews in South Florida who have voted Democrat in the past, and they're having to reckon with this decision because where do they vote? Because they see where this administration is at on the topic of Israel, and we can go off onto that. And so hopefully say this and speak to this topic here of how she stands and this administration stands with Israel.
Before I forget though, Zach, you were talking about polling. I saw a poll the other day where Orthodox Jews were now going to vote 67% for Trump in a poll. And of course, when we say polls, we have to put an asterisk by it. How was the poll? How was,
Correct.
did they interview 2 Orthodox Jews or what age group? And there's so many ways that you can take polling and manipulate it, understand that. So anytime we say polling, I think here's the thing that people don't understand. And war is terrible. War is horrible. But I read a quote the other day by an Army general that was in the Pacific in the 1940s. And when that war began, how violent the Japanese Imperial Army was. And it was just as much so as what we've seen since October the 7th. Terrorism and darkness breeds violence. And he made a comment. He told the troops, the American troops going in, you have to understand, we have to fight at the same level of violence as the bad guy to defeat them. That's a bad part of war, but I think Netanyahu realizes that. That's why he did the photo ops. He never refused to meet with the Secretary of State, and he listened to him, and then he went out and did what he knew he had to do. He had to invade Rafah. He had to fight the violence with a level of violence that the IDF is capable of. And they certainly did it in Rafah and cleaned it out. They're going to continue I don't know what Vice President Harris has. This is to the undecided voter that you've talked about that may be listening to us, the people that haven't decided, and we're thinking here or there. We don't want to lose the blessing. We have always been Israel's ally since 1948. We declared them a nation 10 minutes after they did. We don't ever want to lose that blessing. That's part of the part that in the scripture of the Bible where we read the covenant of God on Israel. That's what darkness doesn't understand. They're fighting IDF soldiers who fight under the covenant of God. And it's like Bill Moyer, the comedian, he made a very valid point one night. He said, he was talking to a lot of pro-Palestinian people. He said, I got a great idea. Why don't we just leave them alone? And then there'll be peace. There was peace on October the 6th. Israel did nothing but live in peace. And then they were invaded on October the 7th. And it's created all of this chaos and death all the way around. I hope I portrayed that correctly, but I've seen this since 1948, 56, 67. Every time we get into this, we do have administrations like the Obama, Biden, Harris administration that believe ceasefires are going to solve a problem, and it's not. They would have simply reloaded, they would have simply rearmed, and they would have continued to fight with Israel and kill people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point in looking at the historical aspect of where America has stood. And I want to point this out. This is from this is comparing contrasting Trump versus Harris here. This is her basically foreign policy. Is she saying keep America safe, secure, and prosperous, and stand with our allies, stand up to dictators, and lead on the world stage. The problem with that is if she's going to tie herself to the Biden campaign, or more so the Biden administration, is why haven't you done that? Trump's great line during the debate was, let's end the debate now. Let's go over to the White House and let's have you deal with this right now. Let's go to the Capitol. Let's have you deal with this right now. Why haven't you done it? And this just reminds me of, if you've ever read George Orwell's Animal Farm, and which kind of ties into, and this will kind of hit home, hopefully, if you paid attention to politics long enough, of what Obama and Nancy Pelosi said about what is, the Affordable Care Act, what is better known as Obamacare, of, well, you have to pass the bill to see what's in it.
Yeah.
Is this administration, this campaign, I should more so say, is saying, well, you have to put us in office to see if we'll do these things. And if we're going to look at records, and this is what we're going to have the conversation about, is the records of what we're seeing, that what Trump did versus what Biden did on the world stage is stand up to dictators. There is another article, I want to look at this a little bit, is some of the things that Trump versus the Biden campaign administration has done. And just so we can kind of highlight these, the pullout of Afghanistan, which was just one of the most disastrous things. And I want to highlight that, like, one of the most disastrous military actions we could have done, which Trump was on the way of doing that. It needed to be done properly, and Biden just pull out. Some actions that President Biden did to possibly allow the invasion of Ukraine through that from Russia. There is, which is not here, giving money back to Iran, which people forget, is that because it's one of the things where it says here Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Iran nuclear deal and put on sanctions, reinstated bank and oil sanctions, which prevented Iran from getting money, which as soon as the Biden administration got in, they gave them money, which has been linked to what has happened on October 7th and all the weapons that they've been able to improve, and the fast ramping up of the possibility that Iran gets nuclear weapons and then now gets closer towards developing weapon systems to be able to launch them. Yeah. So this is the clear distinction, and you can throw in some of the things that happened that are down here with October 7th, with allowing the Houthis now out of Yemen to basically blockade shipping into the southern ports of Israel. Weapons just in tax increasing on Israel from that. And then also you see from Trump, U.S. pull out of the Human Rights Council, which, let's remind ourselves that Iran and China have been heads of and leaders of. So this is this is the kind of compare and contrast here that you're seeing, and this is from News Nation. I'll put the link here in the comments so you guys can go look at this and read this, because there's more topics here, and we'll touch on a few of them. But here we see this, and the question would be and maybe there's a better question you can think of, Randy, is if we were to decide possibly going into World War III, on a natural level, what would be the case for both of them, and what would you think the outcome would be if both were elected, or if either were elected, I should say?
The thing I've learned about history, Zach, is we will always be judged by the people we elect as our president. We're always now, especially with a global world, we're one day from a world war at any given moment in our lives. That's what we live with now. We're not the America of the 1930s and 40s where we're protected by the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean. We're in a global world, and we can be at a global war tonight, especially with what's going on. We have to make sure that we have the strongest leaders in our position from now on in our lifetime and for our grandchildren and children to offset this, because strong guys like Putin, strong guys like China and like North Korea, they respect strong leadership. And President Trump showed in those 4 years, like North Korea, they stopped their testing when he confronted them. He went head to head with Putin. I think leaders like that respect each other, that are strong. But a strong leader keeps us out of a fight. And we really struggled the last 3.5 years with that, because it looks like to me the world has just pretty well done what they wanted to. And I agree, there probably wouldn't have been a Ukraine. There probably wouldn't have been an invasion of Ukraine if Biden had not been president. We don't know that for sure, but I know this. I know even the bad guys respect strength, and that's what we have to make sure of. And
yeah, and I think the military voices that are out there speaking, they understand where things lie, and they understand that which candidate would actually hold strength. Now, I want to move on to a very important topic. I think as believers we need to consider, and this is one of the things that is troubling to me when I have conversations with people, and what I'm hearing is that even believers on this topic, if they were make it a one issue candidate, this is still not enough. They would even consider, because of whatever issue they have with former President Trump, is that they would possibly not vote for him despite his record on the pro-life issue. And obviously we know his record, which was he is considered the most pro-life candidate in U.S. history, and the fact that he put in 3 Supreme Court justices who then overturned Roe v. Wade, a historical monument. But I want to read this this opening paragraph from the Harris campaign in regards to some things that they consider to be fundamental freedoms. And then I want to look at the specifics of what it is they consider to be fundamental freedoms. And the statement is, the opening paragraph is, a new way forward. Vice President Harris and Governor Walz are fighting for a new way forward that protects our fundamental freedoms, strengthens our democracy, and ensures every person has the opportunity not just to get by, but to get ahead. And then it talks about her record as a prosecutor. But I want to skip all the way down to some of the things that she considers fundamental freedoms. And the top line item here is restore and protect reproductive rights. Nowhere in the U.S. Bill of Rights, nowhere in the Constitution does it ever talk about, and this is why the Supreme Court ruled the way they did, does it say that reproductive rights are a fundamental right enshrined in our government. And she's saying that it is, and this is something she wants to do. Now, we see Trump on what he did in the statements of where to push the line of 6 weeks, 15 weeks. He's saying this is left up to the states. And one of the things he says, and basically this is the thing that he's kind of falls back on this issue, is it depends on the states. And on his website, in regards to issues like this, is he says he wants to defend our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and our fundamental freedoms, including freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the freedom and the right to keep and bear arms. So here are the two dynamics of this. Of you have a government here that if Vice President Harris were to get in, she wants to try to possibly pack the court to overturn Roe v. Wade, and talking about these reproductive rights. Where when you look at this in her, she's obviously bashing the overturning of Roe v. Wade here, but she talks about here she wants to defend reproductive rights and safeguard the privacy of patients and providers. That has nothing to do here with this issue. Unfortunately, that's a HIPAA law. But the reality is there's no talk of here of the baby. And then they go on to talk about how Trump doesn't stand for IVF, no matter how you stand on that issue. Trump has said he's for IVF. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's a state issue. And then this lie that's been told out there now about how doctors are afraid of servicing and providing medical care to patients who have had abortions or botched abortions or et cetera, stuff like this. And there have been major instances that have come up, but there's a lot of smoke and mirrors around those cases because of some actions taken by unlicensed professionals. And then the issue of the FDA allowing mail-out abortion, day after pills to be sent to somebody that they can take in their home and not have to take them in front of a doctor, which is kind of, in my personal opinion, goes against the Hippocratic Oath, but that's a separate issue. So we see here on this issue of abortion where the Harris campaign stands, and the question would be is for believers, and I think this is what I want to have a conversation around with you, Randy, is how is this not an issue? Like what would be the thing that you could think of that would cause someone to not understand, I guess would be the better way of understanding the severity of what each administration would want to do, obviously in regards to this issue, but ultimately what they define as fundamental freedoms. Like how is their stances in the past not enough to convince them to vote one way or the other?
Okay, are you saying that maybe we've got believers out there that aren't satisfied with the Trump stance? And
I think, yeah, because the issue goes, we were talking about this before. We saw this in Louisiana with the John Bel Edwards and David Vitter vote, because believers didn't have and Vitter he made some mistakes in his past. He admitted to them. His family had forgiven him. For those who don't know, Vitter was a candidate for governor, 2014, if I remember correctly, or 2015, somewhere around there. And he had a troubled past in his marriage where he had an affair, and it came out through the campaign. And there were a lot of believers here in Louisiana who decided to vote the opposite way towards John Bel Edwards. That's how he got in office, because he wasn't a perfect candidate. Even though he had made his mistake, he had never tried to hide it. His wife had forgiven him. They'd reconciled. They had a true healing. And it really just kind of turned things in. And I think to some instances, we're seeing those kind of same narratives be put on President Trump, from, the quote unquote new Never Trumpers, the Lincoln Project, et cetera, people like that who are, and the question would be is what is, if not this issue, what is the issue that would convince them enough to want to vote for, President Trump? Is the state's issue, allowing states, is that enough for people, or what could be done to possibly convince them to say, okay, Roe v. Wade's been overturned. Now, when he says, he's for a 15-week or 6-week abortion ban, where do we lie, and how do we navigate that conversation with those people that we possibly come across? Now
I've really veered into my personal opinion, because history is not going to give us an answer on abortion, because it's a generation. I think it's a generational solution, because at one time, Zach, people have how many, 66 million abortions since Roe v. Wade or something like that. So we've
63 or 66. Yeah.
Yeah. We've numbed ourselves to the murder of children, in my mind. And so now that's a solution that we want solved, and it's not going to be solved overnight. I don't think it's a divisive thing that I do believe. I do believe that pulling Roe v. Wade out and going to the state is it's only a beginning. I think it's a strong stance that's what makes our system stronger than, say, a Germany of the 30s and so on. Not a central government, but a strong state government. And I think we're going to have to re-educate people. One of the biggest things I saw when I was in medical sales was the technology started to educate people. Ultrasound machines and things that were provided, and people actually saw a baby in there with it was a baby. They could see the ultrasound photograph and realize that was a live baby at that time, before that technology was really available. There is no quick answer to abortion. I do believe this. I do believe President Trump accomplished something that no one else did when he put those 3 Supreme Court justices in. I can veer back into history and tell you this: Republicans had a great record of abandoning their candidates for the Supreme Court. Their nominees. I don't know if you remember Judge Bork, but it even created a new word in the American dictionary. You've been borked. In other words, you've been abandoned. The Republicans, which I was a part of, they're really good at abandoning good candidates that they put up. When the Democrats attack full hog on them, then they back off. Trump didn't do that. He fought for these 3 candidates, and we did get Roe v. Wade taken out, and it's a beginning. I wish I had a better answer, but I don't. I think
maybe speak to this of, because I think this is how history can kind of reconcile here, is going back to the issue of slavery and then even abortion. What was the thing that in those 2 instances that were done to devalue the full human beings that were in those cases, of the Jews and then of the slaves?
Well, in the Jews' case, the children, Hitler said, if you give me a child 6 years old, I can make him anything. And what they did was they took 6-year-old children, compared them to rats, that they weren't humans. And then he had 18-year-old soldiers that would shoot women and children point blank without any guilt. And in slavery was a threat in our nation. And, no one was really innocent. Most people don't know this, but the beginning of slavery trade was in the Northeast. A gentleman by the name of Yale University, he funded a lot of his university by selling slaves. And of course, the South, it's a burden the South still lives with today in history. But then there were other factors in the Civil War, but in slavery, it was, they were considered 1/10 human when they did a census. A slave was considered 1/10 of a person. So it gave the sense that a slave was not a human. And that's what they've done with abortion. This isn't a real baby. This baby's not alive. And of course, one big mistake they made on the debate was for ABC. Of course, ABC was just so corrupt. It was, we could spend 3 days talking about how can you not have a real debate? I'm sorry. This is the United States. How can you not have a real debate? But ABC jumped in and she said there was not a state in the nation where you could abort a baby after it was born. And what is it, like 12? I mean,
Yeah.
She was totally wrong. I saw a Democratic nominee that ran, I think it was when Biden was running. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame, and he was for that. And I saw him give a speech on Fox News that he was for, letting the baby live for an hour while they decided what to do with it. So, but that's what we've created, and that's what we have to overcome. That's why I say there's not an answer, but I say putting it to the state and letting people vote on it now is, maybe there's something to people going and pulling a lever that gives them a sense of responsibility now, if it's held up to the voter to vote for abortion or vote not.
Yeah. And so I think we see here the differences of each candidate and where they lie on this issue. You have Kamala Harris saying that reproductive rights or abortion is a fundamental freedom, where President Trump is saying, "Look, I'm not trying to be the one to control this narrative. Obviously, he's going to allow freedoms to be put in his place, and he's going to put people who are going to allow freedoms. And now it's up to us, the people, to put people in office to stand up for as believers." And as America was intended to stand up for freedoms of basic human rights there. Now, I want to move on to the economy. And this one is obviously a hot topic. And I want to point out a few key issues is how, and I want to go back to this website of the Harris campaign, is it doesn't matter what issue the the Harris campaign is talking about. They're always trying to tie in Trump's Project 2025 agenda. And the clear distinction between that is, one, Trump has literally fired anybody who has any part
That's
in
right.
negotiation with that, because that's from the Heritage Foundation. That's not from Trump. Even though there are a lot of good things there, they're even in agreement that, look, there's some things that he likes that Trump likes that they would agree with, and some things that he likes, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so they understand things aren't going to overlap. But in reality is, Trump's campaign talks about, if I can find it, it talks about Agenda 47. And so they're obviously trying to, it might have been on his homepage where they talked about it, but yeah, Agenda 47 platform, that's kind of his movement. So this idea to sit here and say that Agenda 2025 is Trump's is kind of a disastrous overall, and just incorrect. But obviously we've seen interest rates, we've seen the economy, we know all this, but it's a simple marker for us to look at of just the inflation during President Trump's presidency, of what he'll allow. And obviously we know the tax cuts and reinvestment towards manufacturing here in the United States, because of some things we saw during COVID, which is good. But if we're just going to look at a one measure mark here, is inflation during President Trump's presidency from 2017 to 2020 was under 2.5% each year. 2.1 in 2017, 2.4 2018, 1.8 in 2019, and 1.2. And you could obviously talk about how, and this graphic talks about how here at the beginning, right before the beginning, in March of 2020, where COVID began, and how you saw a dip in the economy. And so a lot of people, and we would also as well give Trump a little grace there to navigate and understand how to navigate that. But then we go into President Biden's presidency, and some inflation there of 2021, 4.7, 8%, and 4.1%. And this is from a Democrat standpoint of view, this is what they're going to say, is that, well, President Biden was recovering, and this is really the effect of Trump's economy, et cetera, and stuff like that. And which is funny, because they'll say the same thing for Trump, because he had a good economy. They would say, well, that's really Obama's economy. And these are all stats from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. But I point this out to sit here and say is, okay, if Israel's not enough, if abortion's not enough, now let's look at the economy. The famous lines that have been said numerous times is, it's the economy, stupid. And we've gone back and forth about this a few times, is the economy, is the pain on the wallet enough to convince people to vote either way? And we have to look at, okay, what are the plans of the candidates moving forward? If you've seen anything from the Harris campaign, they've talked about helping with down payments for homes. They've talked about, quote unquote, cutting taxes for the middle class families. I'll pull it up here from her own campaign website, of how she talks about make rent more affordable and home ownership more affordable. They've talked about rent controls, which those have always worked out extremely great in New York, in California. And I'm being extremely sarcastic, because they've ruined the real estate markets there and hurt Americans overall, especially the poorest of the poor. And so when we see these type of of policies being put forward. I'm trying to get to it. She talks about investing in America's source of strengths. I can't remember exactly where it was. I was reading another article where she talked about some other things. Here it is pathway through of quality, affordable middle class education. And what we see here is the difference, and I'll summarize it this way. We're seeing here from all these statement points from the Harris campaign is government intervention into everyday life of Americans, versus you have the Trump campaign where they just want the Americans to be able to make their own decisions, of defending fundamental freedom. I go back to this one because this applies to basically all of it, is letting the principles that the nation was founded upon to allow the states, to allow communities to be able to make their own decisions. And the clear contrast here is, uh, do we want to continue to allow governments to make decisions for us? In the reverse, even going back to abortion, is, well, they want, quote unquote, state to be out of it, but now on everything else, they want the reverse. And so if we're going to sit here and try to have a conversation with people who are kind of on the fence about this, is for me, the question is, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe you can add to this, is, do we think that government programs are the solution? Because there's a saying, what's more permanent than a government program? And so once you start something involving this of tax credits, which those government getting involved in real estate market has been just so great since 92. Let's bring Randy back here.
Hey, am I
And
back?
you're back. And so here on the economy is, if Israel's not enough to convince someone to vote one way or the other, if abortion and pro-life stances aren't enough from each candidate, what is it about the economy that you would try to explain to people? And maybe there are questions that we could ask people to get them to see where they're at on these issues, of, okay, now let's go to the economy, of what are the issues that are preventing you from, especially as a believer, from voting either way?
The scariest words you'll ever hear, Zach, is I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
That's perfect.
That's Ronald Reagan. Government programs don't do this, and I'll give you a great example in just a moment. But the two things that drive the economy is inflation and fuel cost. And the Obama administration destroyed both. Every time I go pay $6 for a box of Cheerios, I know I voted the right way last time. And of course, gasoline. Everything moves on wheels in our country. Drive I-40 to Memphis one Saturday morning, and you'll see, you can't count the 18-wheelers you'll see. Everything moves. So when fuel cost goes up, there goes your inflation and your prices, and everything's messed up. The problem is politicians, and I'm being generalized here, politicians don't realize what drives the economy. That's why my father always said, I sure would like to see a businessman president before I leave, and he didn't get to. But it's simple. Cut taxes, cut regulations, get out of the way. This is the greatest economy in the history of the world. Just get out of the way and you'll see things go. The example I'm going to give you is John F. Kennedy, who I've read a lot about in the last 2 or 3 years, and I haven't before now. 1962, he's got a lot of problems on his plate. He's got the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's got a lot, Vietnam firing up. But the economy started going bad, and he invited an economist in. I think it was a Republican, a communist, a conservative economist. He said, how do I get the economy going? He said, cut taxes. Cut taxes and leave it alone. And the economy began to go. It's simple. It's common sense. And the government can't understand that. That's how simple it is. Trump did he did a wonderful job. If someone's out there on the fence now, just ask them, what were you paying for gasoline? What were you paying for a box of Cheerios? What was your biggest
Carton of eggs?
Yeah. The gasoline, the child care, everything goes up because everybody drives cars. Everybody's affected by inflation. And what did he do? He opened up the Keystone Pipeline. So now we were totally energy independent when he left. Now we get our oil and our crude and everything from some countries who don't even like us. That's not a comforting thought. Our emergency storage of oil has been. If we really needed it, we would be in trouble from reports that we see on the news. So, economy. Hey, Zach, we've talked about this, and at one time we kind of pulled back. I still believe people vote their pocketbook on November the 5th. I think that's the biggest issue. Everything's important, but I think that's the biggest issue.
Yeah,
Not everybody pays attention like we do, and that's great. This is what we do. This is what we like to do, read history and read. They're concerned about raising their family, sending their kids to college in 10 years. All of that is tied into money in the economy.
Yeah, and hopefully, if is the topic of Israel, those who bless Israel shall be blessed, and standing up for the voice of the voiceless isn't enough. Hopefully, the economy itself can be a point there. And to speak of, what you talk about, John F. Kennedy and The Economist, there is even going back further. The principle basics of economics is Calvin Coolidge said this, and it was very well known and understood in vast majorities of the American public. And this is obviously pre the Great Recession, my mind's going blank, the Great Depression, where Calvin Coolidge said this. He says, "And when in a down economy, the one thing or the two things you do are cut taxes and cut the size of government."
Yep.
And when he took over in the middle of his term from the previous president, after drawing a blank there on the name of the president he took over from, is that he cut taxes and he shrank the size of the government. And what do you see from this administration? They want to increase taxes, despite what they say of cutting class of the middle tax. We've seen the effects of it. And obviously energy does hold a huge part in that. But they're increasing the size of government. And so, and that was one of the things Rick Joyner talked about specifically is in his advice to President Trump when he took office, was that if you're going to spend $1, you got to cut a quarter. And obviously he did better than that. If I'm the ratio, I may be off on the ratio, but basically he needs to cut more than he's adding. And I think Trump even realizes he didn't do as great of a job as he should have done. And hopefully if he were to get back in, he could ramp that up and cut the size of government and move forward in there. But that's the key thing. And the counter to that statement from Calvin Coolidge was in the next presidency in the 30s. You saw if you want to see contrasting presidencies, look at the 20s when Coolidge was president, when they had the same exact unemployment, economic downturn and low GDP in the 20s as it did at the beginning of the 30s. And the two differences are that in the 20s with Calvin Coolidge, they cut taxes, they cut government spending to get people moving. And in the 30s, you have government handouts, high taxes, and we see that an economist, and I study this in college extensively, is that the Great Depression was prolonged because of government intervention. And before that in the 20s, the downturn in the economy was actually prevented from going as long because of the freedoms that were allowed from the government. And you see the same exact thing play out in John F. Kennedy, in Ronald Reagan's economies. You could even talk to George Bush Jr., W, and then even in some of Bill Clinton's, because he was handcuffed there, and President Trump's. When they cut taxes, you allow the American people, American ingenuity, freedoms to move forward in an economic, capitalistic sense. So we see the contrast here, and we're seeing where these, and we can obviously speak to the oil issue of that I think you highlighted so well, go deeper. But any last closing remarks? We're kind of hitting that hour mark. Want to close up here as we head towards November 5th, as we're 14 days away here in the final stretch.
I think President Trump is in a position to win this and win it big. I'm not a political strategist, and I wouldn't sign my name on the prediction, but The momentum is like in football. He's got all the momentum. He is now ahead in all battleground states. He's got the momentum. I think the pivotal thing was the assassination attempt. I think from that day on, they gave Harris a break for a while when she came on, but she's beginning to lose the glamour. And I think everything is set up for him to come back and really correct a lot of things as far as Israel and the economy and we didn't talk about immigration. That's another horrible thing that's befallen our nation. It's not going to. And if he and let me say this real quick, Zach. He's not. People have kind of misunderstood what people are saying out there that think like I do. We don't believe that if by chance the Democrats were to go back in, it's not America wouldn't disappear overnight, but the America that you and I know would disappear overnight. It wouldn't be the end, but it would be a great shifting. Germany didn't go away. Germany was taken by Nazi Germany. Germany, the nation, remained, but they turned into something very, very bad.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to close out here. Is now we have an opportunity, despite whether you think it's been won or not won, to make our voice be heard. And kind of the point of this conversation was to highlight just key issues here. If you're going to boil them down to two or three issues, is obviously Israel, hopefully as believers, should be one within your top two, and then obviously the pro-life issue of where those stand, and then you can look at from there delineating down, whether it be the economy, the border, et cetera, stuff like that. So we want to, hopefully you guys have learned a lot from this. Please go back and watch it and look at some of the articles that are out there. Look at some of the facts of what each candidate has done, not what they say just what they say they're going to do. Hopefully, if President Trump were to get in office, he can uphold what he said. And he's no perfect candidate in some of his policies I would personally disagree with, and I could go at length into that, but I'm not going to. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this conversation was to just look at what has each candidate done and the record that they're running on, the record that they're saying. And the big thing for Vice President Kamala Harris is you've had 3.5 plus years to do it. Why haven't you done it? And so with that, we'll close out. And thank each and every one of you for following along. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe wherever you guys are watching. And then I put in the beginning of the comment sections of the episode our Telegram channel, as we're starting to release more information that we can't even talk about on here because we're still on YouTube and Rumble, and release more information on a constant basis. So let's continue to pray, continue to stand on the wall for this nation. And hopefully that believers will lay down their pride in what talks about in Romans 12, offering themselves as a sacrifice before the Lord, and having a renewal of so they can have renewing of their mind in order to get in line and kind of be that plumb line with what the Lord is asking us to do here in this season and in the season ahead. So blessings, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Have a good one.